Hello, everybody. Welcome into GSMC's Down by Contact Sports Podcast. I am your host, Jeremy Lapidus. Today is Tuesday, February 25th. Hope everybody is having a great day so far. We have a lot to get into. A potential doomsday clock has started on college football, and that might sound a little bit dramatic, but it is not at all. We'll talk about why that's the case and what might go down in 2031, as well as going over a couple of big pieces of news from around the NFL, as all the general managers and coaches have started to arrive and done press at Indianapolis for the NFL Combine. We'll talk about Kirk Cousins. We'll talk about some news from major players and what came out today in their conferences. We'll also get into our continuing series, previewing every single team's offseason, what a perfect offseason would look like. Today, looking at the Seattle Seahawks before previewing the MLB season for the final team in the AL West, the Oakland, or should I say Sacramento, Athletics. But before we do any of that, remember, if you would like to be an even bigger part of the show than you already are, all you need to do is go to gsmcpodcast.net. Or if you're on YouTube, you can use that super chat feature. If you do either of those two things, a message should pop up on the bottom of the screen for you, me, and everybody else around the world to see. If you do have a burning question about sports, anything at all that you would like to ask, go ahead and throw that in the comments. Throw it in the chat. I will get to it as soon as I possibly can. I appreciate everybody so much for sticking around, talking some sports with me here on a beautiful Tuesday, February 25th. But like I was saying, we are going to get into our first topic. A potential doomsday clock has started for college football. And again, like I said in the intro, it might sound a little bit dramatic, but I promise you it is not. The sport of college football is primed to change as we know it in 2031. And it's for a couple different reasons. And we'll break it down. We've talked a little bit about why in the past as the power two of sorts for college football right now. The SEC and the Big Ten have had their meetings. Now there is something that seemingly is all coming together in 2031. In 2031, that is when the Power 2, the SEC and the Big Ten, have cut off the next negotiations for the college football playoff. So whatever they come up with next year is going to last until 2031, as well as the Big 12 media rights deal set to expire in 2031. The ACC, their media rights deal is set to expire in 2036, but very crucially, their grant of rights deal, as renegotiated with their big name guys, expires also, you guessed it, in 2031. So what this sets up for is all of these major conferences, all four of the Power 4 teams, to be sort of free agents. All four of the Power 4 conferences will be in the midst of negotiations. Will be in the midst of getting a new deal done, which is going to set up a new renaissance for realignment or the creation of a proposed Super League. We have seen Greg Sankey and the SEC really start to push for an idea sort of like this. Now, they're not saying Super League. That's not what they're going to name it, but they are talking about a collection of around the top 70 schools in all of college football. And some stuff came out today from a couple shows around the country that they were talking about it becoming a real thing, where the Power 2 and their Super League of sorts would split off from the NCAA, and the most likely year that this would happen is 2031. Now, of course, that changes the face of college football forever. That now has a competing league with the NCAA. The NCAA has done all this legwork, and now their most profitable, most recognizable brands, their best teams, are all disappearing to create a brand new league where they control everything, where they control the money, where it's going to be a lot more like a professional league, where they're going to be able to pay the players, give them contracts. Now, the real question comes, how is it going to work when we're talking about moving players from what the NCAA would become to this new Super League? And the Super League would, of course, be the higher one. The NCAA would still exist and would still exist for every other sport, but college football would separate it. itself, right? It would just be this college football super league led by the Big Ten and the SEC. But it also, crucially, would include anybody, including a group of five school that could afford to do it. This is something they're talking about. They're talking about getting more money because, of course, why wouldn't you get more money? Money talks in this world, and it's no different when we're talking about the SEC and the Big Ten and college football. It was always thought of as an amateur sport. There was no money involved in it for the players, but now with the addition of the NIL, with the transfer portal, with everything, it's starting to become more and more like a professional league. And now the SEC and the Big Ten in particular are saying we can split off in college football and make our own league, our own organization, a competitor to the NCAA. And we're going to take everything that has been set up over the last 100 years of doing football, of doing all these sports around the world, and make it our own, just completely changing the face of everything. Now, the one thing that has been talked about with this is which teams are going to come over. And like we said, the Big 12, they would be able to poach just about anybody they wanted. The ACC, they'd also be able to poach just about anybody they wanted. But the big thing with the ACC is the fact that ESPN and ABC reportedly have been really pushing this idea of a super league that would get all of the best product from around college football in one place, and it would look more like the NFL, look more like a professional league. It would be funded by private backers, private money. You would need to have the money to buy in, but if you were a rich group of five school, if you're a Boise State, if you're a Sacramento State, if you're a James Madison University that puts a lot of money into athletics, right? You are a team that could potentially find their way in there. And that might sound like a good thing for some of those schools, but at the end of the day, this is not a good thing. This is going to completely destroy the sport of college football. And one thing that Greg Sankey has said is that he doesn't want to diminish the sport. He wants to grow the sport, continue to expand it. But what you're doing right there, crucially, is cutting off half of the fans, cutting off half of the universities, cutting off half of the fan bases, and basically saying you're being relegated to this other league. We don't really even want to be associated with you. And you're already seeing a split, right? We have designated Power 5, designated Power 4, designated Top 2, Group of 5 conferences that are just known to be different, known to be better. And that's fine most of the time because a lot of the times it is. But with the addition of NIL over the next couple years, with the addition of the transfer portal over the last couple of years, we have seen the gap kind of shrink a little bit with the top teams in the Group of 5 being a lot more competitive with not the top of the SEC and the Big Ten, not the top of the Big 12 and the ACC, but those teams in the middle and the bottom. The best Group of 5 schools could fit into a Power 4 conference and be a middling squad. I'm not saying they would come in and win, but if you put a Tulane, if you put a Boise State, if you put a James Madison into one of these ACC, Big 12, Big 10, SEC, they wouldn't flounder. They wouldn't float to the top, but they would probably sit somewhere in the middle, probably go around maybe even a little bit better than 500 in conference play, depending on the schedule. But these are teams that have the ability to beat these other teams in these power conferences. And as we see the transfer portal go further and as we see NIL go further along and develop, we're going to see less and less split between these two. This is not good for the sport. Again, it's called Doomsday for a reason. It's called Doomsday because what you are doing is you are completely starting over. And they're not going to look at it like this. We've talked about how the SEC and the Big Ten are going to be on top forever. This is a way for them to say, yes, we are. We're going to be on the top forever because we are in charge now. Greg Sankey is going to be, for lack of a better term, the commissioner of this new league. He's trying to make it more of a pro-style league with private equity, with contracts being giving out to these players. So it kind of kills the transfer portal right there. The question is, how legal is this? There's no reason why it shouldn't be legal. But then the other question is, where does this change recruiting-wise? Like, are you still able to recruit all of these players? And for the players that don't get contracts, are they still going to be able to be walk-ons? Are they still going to be able to leave if they don't get the playing time that they want and go to some of these smaller schools, go to the normal NCAA? And again, the big question, who is going to go with them and who is going to stay behind? Because it's going to take a lot of money. Estimates from sources are saying you might need $500 million, $1 billion in liquidity and some private money to just be ready to take this next step, right? That is not an easy task. There's some state laws that won't allow you to put more than 75%, more than 55% of your budget into your sports program. So this is something that there's going to be a lot of stuff to figure out, but 2031 is 7 years away. And with the power that the SEC and the Big Ten have right now, their ability to basically just say, this is what I think should happen, and then have it happen in college football, this feels like more of an inevitability than something that we're fighting against. The Doomsday Clock has been set. 2031 is the year, and we're just watching the end of college football as we know it right now. It feels like Super League is right around the corner, and the NCAA would just become like a Division II or Division 1A with a completely separate playoffs, and it would fade into obscurity a little bit, which not only hurts them, the teams that are still stuck behind in college football, but all the other sports as well. It hurts the Olympic sports. It hurts the ball and bat sports. It hurts the racket sports. It hurts basketball as well, right? They're not gonna. As these conferences in all these other sports see what happened, and football is a lot different than these other ones because they're making money. They're the only ones that can really move away in any kind of real capacity from the NCAA. But it's just not a good thing for the future of sports for college sports, right? It's going to make them more professional, and it's really going to hurt those that are left behind. But let me know what your thoughts are. If this Super League happens, when this Super League happens, what do you think the fallout is going to be? Which teams do you think will stay behind from the Power 4 conferences, and which teams from the Group of 5 do you think might move up there with them? I'd love to hear your thoughts. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we turn our attention over to the NFL. Some major quarterback news, as Kirk Cousins has some news surrounding him with an interview from the Falcons GM, head coach, have had some news around what they might do with Kirk Cousins. We'll be right back here on GSMC's Down by Contact Sports Podcast.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Welcome back to GSMC's Down by Contact Sports Podcast. I am your host, Jeremy Lapidus. Today is Tuesday, February 25th. If you were just tuning in, we just finished going over what the Doomsday Clock is for college football on 2031. In this segment, we turn our attention over to the NFL. Some Kirk Cousins update. We talked a little bit about him when we did our NFL Dream offseason for the Atlanta Falcons, but some more news has come out on how the front office feels about him, what they might do with him, and how that might affect the team. But before we do that, remember, if you would like to be an even bigger part of the show than you already are, all you need to do is go to gsmcpodcast.net. Or if you're on YouTube, you can use that super chat feature. If you do either of those two things, a message should pop up on the bottom of the screen for you, me, and everybody else around the world to see. If you do have a burning question about sports, anything at all that you would like to ask, go ahead and throw that in the comments. Throw it in the chat. I will get to it as soon as I possibly can. I appreciate everybody so much for sticking around, talking some sports with me here on a beautiful Tuesday, February 25th. But like I was saying, we are going to get into a little bit about Kirk Cousins. Kirk Cousins, current backup quarterback for the Atlanta Falcons, signed a massive contract with them just last season. Of course, they also drafted who's now the starting quarterback, Michael Penix Jr., with the top 10 pick in last year's draft. Michael Penix ended up taking over that starting job late in the season and seemed like he's the quarterback of the future for the Atlanta Falcons. Now Kirk Cousins is a very expensive backup. Kirk Cousins signed a 4-year, $180 million deal. 4 years, $180 million, $90 million of that is guaranteed. Now, the way that it's been paid out, it's a little bit front-loaded. There is an out after this year in a traditional sense if it wasn't working. The other thing you have to remember with Kirk Cousins, despite his pretty much abysmal season last year, is the fact that he was coming off of an Achilles tear. And we saw, like with Aaron Rodgers when he was given patience, Aaron Rodgers turned it around at the end of last season. Kirk Cousins, at over 30 years old, is someone that I think still has game left in, still has the ability to be a top 32 quarterback in the NFL if the right team gives him a chance. He is someone that is, again, coming off of an injury, but the issue is his contract. The way that the Falcons gave him a contract, they were expecting him to be their starter for at least 2 seasons. The cap hit for him, the dead cap hit, if they were to cut him right now, is $65 million. That is a lot of money to take on for a Falcons team that is already in the negatives for cap space. That's not something they can do. If they hold on to him for the rest of this season, he's due $27.5 million with a $10 million guarantee for a roster bonus next season if he's still here on March 16th. Again, if he's cut this season, it's a $65 million dead cap hit. If he's cut next year, it's a little bit more manageable at just $25 million. Now, there are a bunch of teams out there, or at least one team that's interested in him. The issue is, if you were going to try and trade him, is the fact that he has a no-trade clause. But it's not necessarily the worst thing. There are a couple quarterback-needy teams that he has shown interest in, including the Cleveland Browns. Kevin Stefanski, of course, one of his coaches when he was drafted to the Washington Redskins at the time. Kevin Stefanski, now the head coach of the Browns, and the Browns need a head coach pretty badly. I need a quarterback pretty badly. I won't say Stefanski is on the hot seat. He shouldn't be on the hot seat, but it seems like some fans and the media are a little bit short-tempered with him. He's a guy that won Coach of the Year just last season, so he's someone that I think deserves a little bit of slack. He's undoubtedly a great head coach, but Cleveland hasn't really been able to be super successful because they haven't been able to find a quarterback under Kevin Stefanski. If they're able to bring in a guy like Kirk Cousins, that would be huge. And again, Kirk Cousins has shown interest in reuniting with Kevin Stefanski and the Cleveland Browns. But on the other side of the coin for the Falcons GM said that he's going to keep Kirk Cousins around. He wants to keep Kirk Cousins around this season, and that's the big news here. If Kirk Cousins stays around, not only is he an excellent insurance policy, right? We're talking about a league that over the last 3 seasons has had 59 quarterbacks start last season, 66 the year before, and 68 different quarterbacks 2-3 years ago, right? That is basically 3 quarterbacks per team that have started a game in each and every season, and that has to do with injuries. These quarterbacks are getting hurt. It's always good to have a backup quarterback on the roster. Never a bad idea. Now, the issue is just how expensive Kirk Cousins is. And Kirk Cousins isn't necessarily going to be super interested in creating more cap space or reworking his contract in a way that would be easier for the Atlanta Falcons to deal with. And that's not necessarily him being a bad guy. He signed this contract. He's not getting the starting or playing time that he wanted. There's no reason for you to say, sure, I'll give away $40 million. Now, I think it would be kind of dumb for the Falcons to hold on to him for the rest of the contract. I talked a little bit about what I think they should do when we talked about the Atlanta Falcons. I believe, last week. This is something that I think would work out best for both sides. You got to rework that contract, right? You got to give the Atlanta Falcons some ability to play with the cap a little bit. If you're Kirk Cousins, if you don't do that, he's got to stay on the roster, right? $27.5 million is a lot easier to eat with an out next season for the Atlanta Falcons than $65 million in dead cap. And that can be split up if you designate him as a post-June 1st release to $40 million this year and $25 million the year after that. And that just might be what they have to do. Again, this is a lot of things about posturing, right? We'll get into what the Browns have talked about a little bit. We'll get into some other interviews, some other updates from around the NFL in our next segment. But when we're talking about Kirk Cousins and the Falcons, they're posturing a little bit, right? Maybe they're looking at trading him, but they're saying, hey, we'll hold on to him. We don't mind holding on to him if we don't get the value that we want, which I think is smart. Because again, like we said, it never, ever hurts to have a great backup quarterback. Never does. You don't know what's going to happen. Michael Penix Jr. in college had a history of injuries, right? He's perfectly healthy, but he's a little bit older, played longer in college because he had to deal with some injuries at his time at Indiana. Michael Penix seems completely fine, and there's no reason to believe that he's going to re-aggravate those injuries, but it's always a great idea to have an insurance policy for a team that wants to compete in their division this season, for a team that wants to be ready to make the playoffs and thinks that they should have made the playoffs last season if they didn't really fall apart in the middle at the end of Kirk Cousins' starting tenure. At the end of the day, I do believe him when he says they're going to hold on to him. I don't think they're going to cut him. I think there's two real options for him. Despite the no trade clause, I think if they're able to get what they want out of a team like the Browns, where he's expressed interest in going to, they will trade him. I don't think they cut him. $65 million in dead cap is just too much for the Falcons to handle right now, and I don't think they really mind if he's on the roster as a backup this season, especially if they can get him to rework that contract. At the end of the day, I think the right answer is trade if you can. If you can't, hold on to him. There's no reason not to. But I'd love to hear your thoughts. What do you think is going to happen with Kirk Cousins? Do you think he's going to get traded? Do you think he's going to get cut? Do you think he's going to stay on this season? I'd love to hear your thoughts. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, some massive news from around the NFL as well. Not just Kirk Cousins, but some updates on Travis Kelce, Khalil Shakir, Teron Armstead, Jamar Chase, Myles Garrett, and more. We'll talk about what's going on with all of them and everything that's come out of the first media day of the NFL Combine. Coming up next here on GSMC's Down by Contact Sports Podcast.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now. Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Welcome back to GSMC's Down by Contact Sports Podcast. I am your host, Jeremy Lapidus. Today is Tuesday, February 25th. If you were just tuning in, we just finished going over the news with Kirk Cousins and the Falcons GM saying that they are thinking about keeping him on the roster this season. We're going to talk about more breaking news from around the NFL as a lot of media appearances have been made by front office members from around the league as the NFL Scouting Combine kicks off on Thursday. But before we do, remember, if you would like to be an even bigger part of the show than you already are, all you need to do is go to gsmcpodcast.net. Or if you're on YouTube, you can use that super chat feature. If you do either of those two things, a message should pop up on the bottom of the screen for you, me, and everybody else around the world to see. If you do have a burning question about sports, anything at all that you would like to ask, go ahead and throw that in the comments. Throw it in the chat. I will get to it as soon as I possibly can. I appreciate everybody so much for sticking around, talking some sports with me here on a beautiful Tuesday, February 25th. But like I was saying, we are going to get into some breaking news from around the world of the NFL. Updates from a lot of massive names, a lot of big questions this offseason. We're going to start off with some retirement news. Jason Peters, who wasn't active last season, officially retired. He retires as one of the best, as a future Hall of Fame tackle, future Hall of Fame offensive lineman, a 9-time Pro Bowler, 2-time All-Pro, won a Super Bowl back with the Eagles when they won their first one with Nick Foles, and he was selected to the Hall of Fame's All-2010s team. That's enough to say that he deserves to be in the Hall of Fame. Jason Peters, one of the best offensive linemen of this generation. He also was announced as he now has a position with the Seahawks as a Veterans Affairs kind of guy, a veteran player leader in the front office. He gets a job right away after retiring. Congratulations to him. Two big pieces of news for him in one day. An incredible career for Jason Peters. He retires a future Hall of Famer. Some more news for another offensive tackle, another All-Pro. Teron Armstead, the Dolphins' All-Pro tackle, is strongly considering retirement. The Dolphins are making plans to move on without him on the team. A big piece of news, though. He's still under contract, set to make $28 million next season. One of these things that I think is crazy, that I think is really cool of him to do, is while he's thinking about this, he is going to renegotiate his contract to take the veteran minimum. So instead of getting paid $28.1 million next season, he is going to make $1.2 million, which is still a boatload of change, a nice little chunk there, but it's a lot less than what he was slated to make while he makes his decision. Teron Armstead dealt with a couple injuries over the last couple of years. He has been a mainstay around the league for a while and one of the best tackles, by far the best offensive lineman on the Miami Dolphins right now. A Dolphins offensive line that struggled enough already after letting a couple of guys go last year. Not having Teron Armstead is going to hurt them a lot. Sounds like he's going to retire, but he has yet to make a decision. But I think it's a really cool story that he's deciding to change his contract to take the veteran minimum, to give the Dolphins the ability to be flexible in his absence. I think that's really cool, and I think that speaks to their culture and really about him as a person himself. But outside of that, there was some big news there was one more big piece of potential retirement news. One of the big stories with the Chiefs after winning the Super Bowl is what's going to happen with Travis Kelce. Travis Kelce, is he going to play his final year of the contract? Now, they've come out and they said, quote, they're excited for Travis Kelce to play out the final year of his contract. Now, that by no means says anything about him deciding to retire or not. That just means they expect him to be back. Things can still change with Travis Kelce. Travis Kelce, of course, is struggling, or I won't say struggling, but is definitely on the decline of his career. Travis Kelce coming into this season, he's going to be age 36. So he's getting to the end of his career, but he by no means is a bad tight end, right? He's still a top 5 tight end in the league. He's just not the best by a mile anymore. And if that's your drop off, that's still pretty impressive. A first ballot Hall of Famer for Travis Kelce. He's obviously got a lot of good. He's got a lot of good going for him outside of the football field with the podcast with his brother and Taylor Swift, of course. So this is not something that is expected to be, a super easy decision for him to make. But I do think, based on what the Chiefs are saying, based on everything that's lining up, that he'll play one more season. Like I said, he's only got one season left on his deal with the Kansas City Chiefs, and that is when I think we can really talk about him retiring. I think that is the magic number for him. No more years on his contract. Just play it out. One more season. Try and end up on top. But outside of retirement news, there were 2 pieces of contract news that came out. We're going to start off with the presumptive one. 2 wide receivers got or were talked about getting contracts today, and one of them just got the Triple Crown. The Bengals said that they are going to reward Ja'Marr Chase by making him the highest paid non-quarterback in the history of the NFL. Right now, to put that into perspective, the highest paid non-quarterback is Justin Jefferson. Justin Jefferson, who's making $35 million a year. And as we've theorized with Ja'Marr Chase, he's looking at about a $40 million contract. That would be about 15% of the cap right now. That is a lot of money to be giving out to a wide receiver, but a guy that arguably is the best wide receiver in the NFL and can be put no lower in the NFL than 3. If you do, that's insane. But Ja'Marr Chase, an excellent wide receiver, someone that the Bengals simply just can't let go of. They're going to make him at least a guy that's getting paid $35.1 million a year ahead of Justin Jefferson. We'll see how much that total is, but he deserves it, especially after winning the Triple Crown this year. He won the wide receiver Triple Crown, broke all of the Bengals wide receiving records, some of them that he even set himself earlier on in his young career. Ja'Marr Chase is something special, and the Bengals notice that they're not going to let him get away like they're letting T. Higgins sort of walk away. But the other big piece of news, not just perspective, but Khalil Shakir gets a massive contract. Khalil Shakir, 4 years, $60 million. $15 million a year is an excellent price for a wide receiver of his caliber. He was the Bills' leading receiver last season, finishing last year with 76 catches, 821 yards, and 4 touchdowns. Not the touchdown total that you really want from your number one receiver, but he is a guy that can impact the game in so many ways. With his speed, his hands, his ability to come in and do some trick plays and stuff, he's a guy that's super valuable. He really came on at the end of last season, and the Bills extending the guy that Josh Allen loves throwing the ball to. They need some more weapons. It's not a great sign when your number one wide receiver is at 821 yards, but Khalil Shakir is a guy that I think can continue to break out. He wasn't someone that really got a whole bunch of targets every single game. Again, 76 catches for 821 yards. He's averaging more than 10 yards per catch, right? That is a pretty good clip. When he catches the ball, he's making use of it. So if you can get the ball into his hands 80, 85 times, 90 times a year, that's when we're talking about a guy that could be over 1,000 yards, a whole bunch. This is someone that I think is absolutely worth giving $60 million to. $15 million a year for Khalil Shakir is absolutely nothing, and the Bills do a great job by extending their best receiver in the building. But let me know what you think. Do you think this contract is worth it? What do you think the Bengals are going to do with Ja'Marr Chase, and what do you think about the potential retirement news from the Chiefs, the Dolphins, and Jason Peters? Love to hear your thoughts. One more thing before we wrap up this segment has to do with Myles Garrett. I kind of teased it in the last segment with the trade talk, but like they said, the stance has not changed. Myles Garrett requested a trade, said it wasn't an easy decision for him. Said he wanted to stay in Cleveland, but they're just not winning. And that's a completely fair stance to take on this issue, right? He is someone that is, in my opinion, by a wide margin, I will say, the best defender in the NFL. He's a guy that I think you put on a team and they are immediately in the next tier of contention because he is just that special. You have to put so much attention on him defensively that it opens it up for everybody else around him. He is that special of a player. He is the MVP for the Browns, and the Browns know it. They say that they're not interested in trading him. Their stance has not changed, which again is fine, but I don't think that means anything. Myles Garrett is going to fetch them at minimum 2 first-round picks and more, maybe even a player. But this is someone that is worth every single penny of that. Myles Garrett, if he gets traded to the Packers, if he gets traded to the Commanders, if he gets traded to the Bills, those 3 teams can immediately throw themselves into Super Bowl contention with Myles Garrett. That's how good he is. They should throw the bag, the world, everything they own at the Browns to take Myles Garrett, especially since a lot of them still have the money to get that done. I think he gets traded anyway. Not going to be an easy thing to fix, though. But I'd love to hear your thoughts on any of the major updates from around the NFL. We'll keep you updated as more general managers and head coaches find their way to the media stand, get asked questions throughout the week as we get a glimpse of what the offseason might hold for a lot of these teams. But we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we turn our attention to what a dream offseason might look like for the Seattle Seahawks. The Seahawks, who were the first team out of the playoffs this year. We'll see what happens as they don't have too many free agents. We'll talk about that and more coming up next here on GSMC's Down by Contact Sports Podcast.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found. For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Welcome back to GSMC's Down by Contact Sports Podcast. I am your host, Jeremy Lapidus. Today is Tuesday, February 25th, if you are just tuning in. We just finished going over what news had come out from the press conferences of these GMs that are attending the NFL Scouting Combine. In this segment, we turn our attention to more off-season content. What might a perfect off-season look like for the Seattle Seahawks, a team that finished just outside of the playoffs? In fact, by draft pick order, the last team out of the playoffs. We're going to talk about that in a second, but before we do, remember, if you would like to be an even bigger part of the show than you already are, all you need to do is go to gsmcpodcast.net. Or if you're on YouTube, you can use that super chat feature. If you do either of those two things, a message should pop up on the bottom of the screen for you, me, and everybody else around the world to see. If you do have a burning question about sports, anything at all that you would like to ask, go ahead and throw that in the comments. Throw it in the chat. I will get to it as soon as I possibly can. I appreciate everybody so much for sticking around, talking some sports with me here on a beautiful Tuesday, February 25th. But like I was saying, we are going to get into the Seattle Seahawks and their dream offseason. A dream offseason for the Seattle Seahawks is a little bit interesting. Of course, they went 10-7 last season, finishing second in the NFC West, missing the playoffs. They're in an interesting cap situation. They've got around negative $10 million, depending on what the cap is actually going to be. And that puts them at 29th in the NFL. they've got a couple questions that they need to figure out, but they don't have that many free agents. So I don't expect them to be super active in the market right away. The one that I think they need to re-sign is linebacker Ernest Jones IV. They acquired Ernest Jones from the Titans mid-season after the Titans traded for him from the Rams at the beginning of the year. Ernest Jones, when he got to the Seattle Seahawks, that defense was atrocious. They had lost a game to the Giants. They had lost a game to a whole bunch of teams. They were in a losing streak. Once he came in, that defense turned itself around immediately. Him and a couple of other changes at linebacker completely changed the course of their season and got them into playoff contention, where they just fell short at the end of the season. But you have to re-sign Ernest Jones. There's been discussions between Ernest Jones and his representation and the GM and head coach of the Seattle Seahawks, and they expect to get a deal done. But if you are doing anything for the Seattle Seahawks, that is your number one priority. Bring back Ernest Jones, the guy with the green dot on your defense, the leader of that team. He needs to come back. There's a couple other starters that are free agents as well, like Lake Tomlinson, their offensive guard, although I expect them to address that either in free agency or the draft, as their offensive line, especially the interior of their offensive line, was not very good. Couple defensive tackles, one starter, Jaron Reed, and a backup in Jonathan Hankins are also free agents. If you can bring back one of them, that would be nice, but I don't think any of that is a real priority. And a restricted free agent in their corner starter, Josh Jobe. Not another guy that isn't super important for them to bring back, but they've got a little bit extra and they're able to bring him back on a team-friendly deal. That's someone that I would look at bringing back as well. So when we're looking at what a team might need in the shoes of the Seattle Seahawks, we're looking at a couple of positions. Of course, the offensive line, especially guards, and especially the guard position. And there's a couple guys that I was targeting in the free agency pool if they're able to get them. Brandon Scherf is going to be a little bit more expensive, probably one of the top guards available, but if you can get him from Jacksonville, that would be a great start. If not, go for someone that's a little bit physical, hasn't had the greatest career, but is young and could be molded into something good in Will Hernandez, currently with the Arizona Cardinals. He shouldn't be too expensive, and with their cap situation, it's kind of what we're looking for. If you're looking at an offensive tackle, Cam Robinson and Jedrick Wills were the names that stuck out to me. Obviously, I think with pick 18 in the draft, they're going to go with a guard or a tackle, but I still think getting an extra one in free agency would be nice. Some other positions that would be interesting, would be good for them to go fill out. Corner, they have a pretty solid one, but they need a second one. Go out and get a cheap corner that could play CB2, maybe a Kendall Fuller from the Dolphins or Rasul Douglas from the Bills that can help turn this team around a little bit. And at defensive tackle, you can go out and get one of the former Bengals tackles that didn't really work over there. I'm looking at B.J. Hill, a big body on the inside, or someone from the Cowboys who aren't going to be able to re-sign a lot of their guys. Osa Odigizua is someone that I'm looking at the defensive tackle position for the Seahawks to go out and grab. If they're able to do that, I think this team potentially finds their way back into the playoffs. Of course, we still need to look at the draft. They pick at number 18. That final spot before the playoffs. And like I said, I think their main priority should be the offensive line. This is a good draft for offensive linemen. There's a lot of highly touted ones. At pick 18, I think there's going to be a couple of them still available. They've got Tyler Booker, probably the best guard available in this draft. Doesn't really have a first-round grade by a lot of these sites. I've seen him sit on the big board around 45. That is a potential second-round guy that you could get, but if you really like Booker, you really want that inside guy, he's someone that would be nice. But someone that I really think would be good for the Seahawks is tackle Armand Membu out of Missouri. He's a massive tackle. You might be able to put him on the inside, but getting more offensive line help for Geno Smith as he enters the last year of his contract would be huge. And the other one, Josh Connerly Jr. out of Oregon. Again, a guy that's falling in late first-round mocks. Maybe you pick him at 18 if you like him, but you have to take an offensive lineman here because that has been an issue for the Seattle Seahawks forever. So go take the best one available. Now, the other big question for them is how much longer do they want to rock with Geno Smith? Geno Smith has been really solid ever since he's taken over as the starter. I think he's found himself into a top 15 quarterback, arguably a top 10 on any given Sunday. He's a guy that is excellent at dealing with pressure. We saw how bad that team is when you put in their backup quarterback in Sam Howell. That didn't work out too well for them. Geno Smith is someone that I think should be looking at getting paid, but he's not a guy that you really want to go out and pay, especially since he's a little bit older. You don't really want to pay him that massive $50, $60 million contract. So I'm really curious to see how this goes. I obviously, in an ideal offseason for the Seattle Seahawks, they can go out and they can re-sign Geno Smith for somewhere around, realistically, probably $40-ish million, around a Baker Mayfield kind of contract. If you're able to get that done with Geno Smith, you're in a really good spot. That's a really good spot to have your quarterback priced at. That's probably the dream for a lot of teams around the NFL, to have a quarterback that isn't top dollar, but still could be arguably top 10 in Geno Smith. If they're able to get him at a reasonable price, bring back Ernest Jones, and add more depth at the guard and the tackle position, that would be the dream offseason for the Seattle Seahawks. Of course, you still have to figure out what to do with the cap first. Sitting in the negatives, you're going to have to restructure some contracts. We're looking at that wide receiver room, right? Tyler Lockett, we don't know if he's going to retire, if he's going to stay in there. Restructure his contract a little bit. See if he's down to do something like Teron Armstead did. Talk to DK Metcalf. He got a big extension. Maybe restructure, add some void years, push the can down the road. If you're trying to make the playoffs now, it's never a bad idea to do that. Look at those guys, try and renegotiate with them. But this is not a team that I think is going to be super active in the offseason, but a perfect offseason. Get Geno Smith back, restructure some contracts, bring back Ernest Jones, and get the best guard/tackle in the NFL draft. But I'd love to hear your thoughts. What do you think a perfect offseason for the Seattle Seahawks would be? I'd love to hear it. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we turn our attention over to baseball. Spring training is in full swing. The Oakland Athletics, or should I say the Sacramento Athletics, are the last team to be talked about here for the AL West. We'll go over everything you need to know about what they did this offseason, as they're in a really weird spot right now. We'll talk about that and much more coming up next here on GSMC's Down by Contact Sports Podcast. Welcome back to GSMC's Down by Contact Sports Podcast. I am your host, Jeremy Lapidus. Today is Tuesday, February 25th, if you were just tuning in. We just finished going over what a perfect offseason might look like for the Seattle Seahawks. In this segment, we turn our attention over to baseball. Spring training is all the way back, and we have one more team to go over in the AL West before we move on to the Central Divisions. That team, of course, is the the Oakland A's, the Sacramento A's. We'll talk about what their season might hold based on what they did this offseason coming up in just a second. But before we do, remember, if you would like to be an even bigger part of the show than you already are, all you need to do is go to gsmcpodcast.net. Or if you're on YouTube, you can use that super chat feature. If you do either of those two things, a message should pop up on the bottom of the screen for you, me, and everybody else around the world to see. If you do have a burning question about sports, go ahead and throw that in the comments. Throw it in the chat. I will get to it as soon as I possibly can. I appreciate everybody so much for sticking around, talking some sports with me here on a beautiful Tuesday, February 25th. But like I was saying, we are going to get into the Oakland Athletics, or the Sacramento Athletics here. They had a very interesting offseason. Of course, the main thing that's going on with them is the fact that they now play in Sacramento. They officially moved out of Oakland. They said they were going to go play in Vegas, but their stadium is not quite ready yet. For now, they're playing at the home of the Sacramento River Cats, the River Cats of the Pacific Coast League. It's a MLB-sized stadium, but it still is a minor league park. 330 to left, 403 to center. This is a little bit of a smaller ballpark. So look at a lot of runs, a lot of home runs this season from a guy like Brent Rooker, who they extended for 5 years, $60 million. The A's also did something out of character for them this year. They spent money, which is something that the fans had been really, really wanting them to do in Oakland. The fan base in Oakland was great, and that ownership wanted to just get out of there as soon as possible. It's an awful situation. They should be shunned for it, honestly. But instead, they get a brand new stadium, lots of funding in a big city, and now they decide that they want to go out and build a competitive team. They started off this offseason by making an aggressive move, acquiring Jeffrey Springs and Jacob Lopez from the Rays, giving away a couple of prospects, including Joe Boyle, Will Simpson, and Jacob Waters, as well as a competitive balance pick in round A of the first round. So that's right after the first round. We're looking at picks 36-ish in this year's draft. That is a pretty solid prospect that they're giving away to the Rays for two starters that could turn into something in Jacob Lopez and Jeffrey Springs, who's going to come into the rotation this season. Outside of that big trade, they also spent the most money that they have spent in a single offseason ever. They gave the biggest contract in the history of the organization out to Luis Severino, a 3-year, $67 million deal, the biggest contract in A's history. Luis Severino is coming off a pretty solid season. It's not something that, really deserves the biggest contract in a team's history. But when the biggest contract in a team's history is sitting at $22 million AAV, it's not the worst deal. 3.91 ERA and 31 starts for Severino last season. He comes over and now he's going to be the ace for this team. That's going to be a really interesting thing. Of course, as I mentioned, they extended Brent Rooker, their best player on offense. 5 years, $60 million is a great deal for your DH. He's had 30 home runs in back-to-back seasons. He had 39 last year that concluded with a 5.1 F WAR season at DH. That is fourth in his position, only behind the three best hitters, three best DHs in all of baseball, in Aaron Judge, Shohei Ohtani, and Yordan Alvarez. And Yordan Alvarez was basically at the same WAR value as him. Yet Alvarez finished at 5.3. Brent Rooker finished at 5.1. So we're looking at an extremely talented hitter. You put him in a ballpark like Sacramento, he might hit 45, 50 home runs this season. He's going to have a huge year. Aside from that, they were pretty active in building their bullpen. Dylan Floro had a pretty solid season last year. They brought him in at a minor league deal. They also bring in Jose Leclerc. 1 year, $10 million. He had a 30.9% K rate last season. You pair him up with re-signing TJ McFarland to add some depth to that bullpen on a 1 year, $1.8 million deal. This is a team that's continuing to build that bullpen. And a bullpen, I think that honestly is pretty solid. They bring in Gio Urshela to play that hot corner on a pretty short deal, 1 year, $2.15 million. Not a bad spot for him, as well as bringing in some infield depth with a guy that can play just about anywhere in Luis Urias on a 1 year, $1.1 million deal. So they spent a lot of money this offseason to go out and get these guys to make their team better. But it didn't come without a couple losses. They move on from Danny Jimenez, Scott Alexander, Ross Stripling, Alex Wood, and Trevor Gott. So all in all, their additions this offseason definitely outweigh their losses. I really do like the additions of some of those relief pitchers. I do love the extension for Brent Rooker. Get your guys in the building. It's something that they were really bad at doing the last couple of seasons when they were in Oakland. Now that they're moving, maybe they can change their ways here. So when we look at their lineup, it's not that bad. They have a really fun outfield. Right fielder and leadoff hitter, Lawrence Butler. These are all projected lineups from Fangraphs if you wanted to go check it out. Lawrence Butler leading off, Brent Rooker hitting second, JJ Bleday in center hitting third, Shea Langoliers at catcher. He's someone to keep an eye on. He's pretty solid, hitting fourth in the cleanup role. Tyler Soderstrom at first base, Zach Galoff at second base, Seth Brown or Miguel Andujar in left field should be a lot of fun. Gio Urshela or Luis Urias at third, and Jacob Wilson at short. A guy really young. They've got a really young infield. It's probably a weaker spot. The outfield's going to be a lot of fun. Obviously, we talked about Brent Rooker. He's going to have a great season. The infield should be interesting. It's definitely the weak spot of this team, but it's something that could be a strength if Langoliers continues to develop. If Jacob Wilson, a young shortstop, can take a big step up, maybe Gio Urshela or Luis Urias can really go into form at third base. I'm not super excited. I'm not so confident that that is something that could happen, but it is definitely a possibility. When we look at their pitching rotation, it's not all that bad. You have Luis Severino as your ace, Jeffrey Springs in that trade from the Tampa Bay Rays as your starting pitcher two, JP Sears at 3, Osvaldo Bido at 4, and Mitch Spence. All of these guys, if you look at their F4 last season, was above average, right? They all had positive WARs. Now, that's not necessarily the end all be all, but to do that on some of the teams that they were on, I think is pretty impressive. I really do. Especially at the bottom of the order, these guys that were on the A's last season had over 1 WAR last season. Is pretty good. I'm excited to see how they can build on it this year. And when we look at the bullpen, of course, you have your closer, Mason Miller, one of the best closers in all of baseball, a guy that can throw 104 easy, electric stuff. Amazing closer. You also add 2 setup guys in Jose Leclerc and Tyler Ferguson, who both had an over 30% strikeout rate last season, as well as Michael Otanes, who also over 30% last season. Those guys can strike out these guys with the best of them. You've got a solid back end of the bullpen. The rest of it is fine. Dylan Floro, 3.9 ERA last season. TJ McFarland they bring back. Grant Hallman, Noah Murdoch as your long reliever. Overall, this team, I think, really did do a great job this offseason. It isn't a super flashy offseason, right? They didn't make these massive moves that are going to make them a playoff team. They of course, are a team that went just 69-93, 4th in their division, missed the playoffs last season, but I do definitely see the improvement with this roster. If a couple of their guys can take big steps up, they're young guys that they're counting on, I think this is a team that could surprise some people. The over-under for this team is set at 71.5 wins. I'm looking at them to win 75 games pretty easy. I think they top out probably at about 80 games, 500. I don't think they make the playoffs either way, and they're in a little bit of a tough division. They've got the Mariners, the Astros, and the Rangers all ahead of them, so I don't think they can quite get ahead of those 3 teams, but I think they can pretty comfortably be 4th and be closer to the 3rd place team in that division in probably the Astros being 3rd place in that division than they are to the Angels, who I think are just dead last in that division. So I really am impressed with this A's team. Hopefully they can continue to build with this, because they do deserve to have some happiness, the A's fans, especially after the team got ripped away from them for no reason at all. But let me know what your thoughts are. What do you think the A's are going to do this season? I'd love to hear your thoughts. We're going to take a quick break. And thank you everybody so much for tuning in to today's episode of GSMC's Down by Contact Sports Podcast. I have been your host, Jeremy Lapidus. We will be back tomorrow going over everything from around the world of sports, including some more previews of the MLB season, some more off-season previews for the NFL teams, and the NBA Power Rankings as we make it into the final stretch right here. We'll see you then. You all have a good one. Bye-bye.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet, damn, ain't that great. I don't wanna go to